Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the last update to the Conservative 2022 leadership race. So, I'm just going to start off real quick here and address the Brown issue. So, he's on the ballot, but he's out of the race. He's been disqualified. My model still has Brown with numbers because of legacy things. He's still in all the polls, and there really wasn't any polls since he got out, so there's not much chance for him to get weighted out of that, and I don't feel like retroactively going in and changing every single data entry point that I put in to remove Brown from. I also don't think it's going to be entirely accurate and won't really capture things, because I think this Brown number here, 4.19, is... So some of them will probably actually be Brown votes, because Brown was kicked off the ballot, or out of the race, after the ballots were created, so he's still on the ballot. So someone might have voted for him first, so he could theoretically get some first choice votes, either by accident or because people voted for him before they realized he was kicked out of the race. And secondly, I suspect this percentage of people who are the Brown voters likely would be going to Charay or Aitchison, but if removed them from the model and I cleared them out, it would just mean that everyone else would be, all candidates would have a slight bump to their vote share. And I don't think that's accurate, because I think the people who were going to vote Brown are not likely going to vote Lewis, Poliev, or Baber. So they are still here, this vote share. And I don't think it's entirely accurate. I don't think Brown's getting anywhere close to 4.19. He might get sub 1%, like maybe like 0.5% or so. But I think a lot of this is like a slush fund for Charay and or Aitchison numbers. And sadly, again, there wasn't many polls since he got kicked out of the race. There's almost 0 polls in the summer. I think there was a couple in early July, but after that, there was none. There's one ledger poll at the end of July, too. So there really wasn't a chance to figure out where the Brown voters were going. So this is the best we can do. Then I'll also note these percentages don't add up to 100%. We go here. Actually, did I even write it down? I didn't. Well, you have to believe me, they don't add up to 100%. And that extra room, same kind of thing. That my model, that's basically just the uncertainty in the vote totals. So there's about 0.3%. My suspicion is Charay might benefit a lot from that little slush fund of extra point, or of surplus votes. Again, about 0.3%, but I don't really know. So we can't really adjust for it. And that's also kind of an artifact of not having a lot of polls for this, so it is what it is. So, as we can see though, to get back to the main point, Poliev is going to win a complete and utter landslide. There is not a single province right now he's not going to win the majority of, and only one province he's going to get shy of 70% by my model, Nova Scotia. I feel embarrassed for my fellow provincial people. But that said, why is this? So there's a lot to be said for this campaign race and understanding it. And the main one is, why is Poliev such a dominant force in the race? He's gotten more or less attacked from left and right in the race. And by that I mean he's a blue Tory, if that makes sense. He's smack dab in the middle of the Conservative Party politically. And if you disagree with that statement, you really don't understand the Canadian Conservative Party. He's definitely to the left of the social conservatives, because he's not talking about really any social conservative issue like abortion or marriage or school choice. He's not talking about any of those. He may or may not support them, but he's not talking about those, so you can't say he is in that camp. So he's to the left of them. And you look at the Red Tory camp, and you know what? He's actually conservative, so he's to the right of them. So, yes, I'm throwing shade at the Red Tories. I don't think they know what they're doing. Especially in the modern days. But anyways, we'll get to that in a moment. So, he's been basically borne the brunt of almost all of the attacks from fellow candidates. Except for the last week where Aitchison and Lewis were piping shots at each other, which is just why. Well, Aitchison was desperate, I suppose. He's probably going to... There's a non-zero chance he might perform below Brown, who's not even in the race anymore, which would be kind of embarrassing. Unlikely, but non-zero. So, on top of this, though, not only is he getting attacked by other members in the race, he's also getting attacked all sorts by the mainstream media. Pretty much everything he does, even no matter how unobjectionable, gets cries of outrage. The other day he tried to deploy a policy where he's going to require government bureaucrats to use the simplest language possible. The simplest possible. Okay. What's objectionable about that? You may or may not think it's useful, but it's objectively harmless. What harm could possibly come out of making bureaucrats write things more concisely? Worst case scenario, it doesn't do anything. Okay, so nothing happened. Best case scenario, bureaucrats end up writing things more concisely, so the average person can understand what are in laws, what are in the regulations I have to follow, which that sounds like a good thing, I would assume. So, that's his most recent policy. Again, pretty unobjectionable. It's not even a right-wing position. Obama did basically the exact same thing in 2010. And if you want to call Obama in 2010 a right-winger, that's a take, but okay. And also the Democrat Congress and Senate in the U.S., if you want to call that right-wing, it's also okay. So, how did this land? Well, mainstream media largely ignored it, but people like Charay, his campaign manager, notably Tasha Caridian, was saying this in 1984 Newspeak. What? Just seriously? What? You had all sorts of journals going on about how this is violating the freedom of speech. The government telling itself how to speak is violating the freedom of speech. I hope you're aware the government doesn't have a freedom of speech, because the freedom of speech is, wait for it, the freedom from the government telling a private person how to speak, not the government telling the government how to speak. Like, what? I don't even have words. Like, these kind of positions are so strange. They don't make any sense. They're just opposition for the sake of opposition. And you might think, oh, that's an outlier, or that's a particular niche one. But no, that's pretty much been the tone of the campaign. It's Poliev will do or say something, and everybody who opposes him hysterically is like, blah. And yes, that is the exact quote. It's blah. That's exactly what they're saying. So, how does this help Poliev? He's getting blasted everywhere in the media. People like Charay, his main opposition at 10.71% of voters, blasting him pretty hard. What does this mean? Why is he helping? Why is it helping him? Why is he doing good? Well, this is, I think, the first time in Canada where you have a politician who understands the internet, who understands how politics works in the age of the internet. 40 years ago, when all you had was radio and a couple cable news channels, if the mainstream media detested you, nobody could see anything else. If you wanted to watch the news, you had a few channels you could watch. In Canada, it'd be like CTV, CBC, a couple others. If you wanted to watch the news, that's what you watched. Unless otherwise you read your local paper, which might not even talk about federal campaign issues very much, or you listened to the radio, which most of the radio stations were also owned by the same companies, because radio is inherently a limited platform. There's only so many wavelengths, so many radio frequencies that you can broadcast over, so there's regulation and control of which ones you can broadcast over, or else the whole thing doesn't work. If two people broadcast the same frequency, you get noise. Makes sense. In that environment, in that time, which is where Charay grew up, it makes sense to not want to be the victim of attacks from the mainstream media. You don't want them attacking you. You don't want them belittling you. You don't want them destroying your platform. Because they're the only places people get news. The only places people hear of the news. Only places people access the news. Enter the internet. Now, yes, you still have the radios and you still have the television networks. But the internet enables you to have online newspapers instead of physical print. And online newspapers, pros and cons on this, but one of the things that online newspapers let you do is it lets you get a variety of perspectives very easily, very quickly, and generally at a national perspective. The downside is it's a national perspective and you lose a lot of local level issues that a local newspaper would carry. That is a problem, but in this case, in a federal race, national is important. So people have easier access to national print news, or I guess online print news. And there's more TV channels, okay, but more importantly, you have social media. And even more importantly than social media, you have video players. Be it YouTube, or I guess in some cases people use Facebook or Twitter, or now up and coming Rumble, and possibly others that exist. People watch video on these services. Well, what's in these videos? Well, it's videos like this one, where you have just some random guy in his house talking about polling modeling and how the election's going. You have those people. This wouldn't exist before. But you also have individual politicians directly giving you their platform in their words, in their description, in their explanation. No filtering, no media. It's their words in their statement. You can directly watch what they're saying whenever you want. You want to understand Poilievre's platform? He has a YouTube channel. He has social media pages. You can go to those pages, go to his channel, and watch his videos, and you will rapidly get exactly what his gist is. It's very, 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 very hard to gatekeep information in the age of the internet, unless the government introduces censorship laws. Sound familiar? But that's another matter altogether. But in the absence of internet censorship, in an internet where free speech exists, it's very difficult to mislead or lie about somebody. And it's very easy for that candidate to cut through it. But what you need in the age of the internet, and this is very crucial, is everyone can say anything they want. People can broadcast all over the place. People can just spin up a YouTube channel in their downstairs room and just talk about things. Doesn't cost a lot of money to do this. Lots of labor, what I'm doing, but not a lot of money. So what makes people pay attention to somebody? What gets interest on the internet? What keeps and maintains interest on the internet? What grows a channel? Well, it's a nascent property, a thing that you can't actually objectively quantify, but it's authenticity. Nobody watches a political news show or looks at electoral modeling if they think the person is intentionally trying to sell them a scenario. As long as the viewer thinks that the person presenting it believes what they're doing and is trying to genuinely do it in good faith, they get more traction. And that also is true in politics. This follows very, very strongly to this. What politicians get traction? They're the ones that people genuinely have faith and believe are pushing policies that they think will work and that they will actually do. That's the big one. That's all that matters. Poliev, by pushing out positions after he's thought, he's reflected, and he has his idea and he has his argument, he pushes it out, he makes his own video, not some paragraph in a platform that someone else has to interpret. No, he makes like a 5-minute video that exactly explains his idea. It's not the legislative implementation, but that's nonsense. Who cares? Do you want to look at 500 pieces of legislation every single election? No, no one does. Barely anyone looks at platforms. And platforms have pretty much only ever been, this is a paragraph about what I want to do. Not the actual law that I'm going to make, just a statement of things I want to do. Well, these videos are actually better than that because it's more detailed and more in-depth than what a paragraph tells you. On not just what you're going to do, but the rationale behind it. So the key here for a successful campaign is not just that you've done this and you are pushing these and you're making these arguments, but now when people push back on them, you defend your position. Or if you are actually wrong, you have to make a compelling reason why you were wrong. And that's very, very difficult for politicians. It's very hard to back off from a position as a politician. You can kind of let it slide and not talk about it, but you can't really say, no, I said this before, it's wrong now. That's very hard to sell. For me, I can make a video projection series and I could be wrong on the projection, get it wrong. And as long as I come out and explain why I got it wrong, like point to things that I did wrong and things I'm going to try to do better, I don't necessarily lose the trust of the audience. I might. That is always a possibility. But in that scenario, I can attempt to rectify why I was wrong if I'm open and honest about it. A politician, that's very, very difficult because the politician isn't just speaking for themselves. Ideas don't generate out of the ether. Things that Poliev is saying, for example, don't just emerge. If Poliev didn't exist, the ideas he's espousing would still exist. The prominence you can debate, but the idea would still exist. And in a lot of cases in a democracy, especially in the internet age, what happens is the ideas emerge on a grassroots level, bubble up through internet pundits and internet discussion, and then they get to the politician levels, and the politicians look at that thing, and they want to exploit it to get power. Sometimes this works great for people. Other times it really, really doesn't. But the ideas pre-exist the politician. And that's the important thing. It's very difficult for a politician who's espoused one idea to repudiate that idea. Very hard. They can ignore the topic. And that's actually a good strategy, because if your opponent really wants to talk about this one thing, probably don't want to talk about that thing. Probably not a good idea. Unless you think you can defeat them on that thing. But if you think that's your weakness, just don't talk about it. You don't have to talk about it. And in fact, Poliev was quite good at that. But that's another matter. But it would make an allusion back to my least favorite conservative party leader in my life, that is. Mr. Aaron O'Toole. He ran basically in the same position Poilievre ran. Mainstream, true blue conservative. Okay. Decent start. Where did he go from there? Well, in the election, this is the big one. Before the election will start, he immediately said he was going to introduce his own version of carbon tax. Trudeau's version was smelly and bad, but I can make a better version. Well, you said you're going to repeal all the carbon taxes, so kind of peeking out of your ass there, O'Toole. That was strike one. That's not a big strike, but that is a strike against him. That already hurts his credibility with his base, and you saw it in the polls. It demoralized his voters. Come the election, the big thing that lost him 2021, more than anything else, people have been, for this, since 2021, for the last year, have been trying to spin this differently, especially red Tories. What lost the Conservatives 2021 wasn't anything Trudeau did, wasn't anything Singh did, wasn't anything Bernier did. It was O'Toole getting slapped with the gun topic and then immediately folding. The Liberal vote share didn't really increase following that. The Conservative vote share collapsed and the PPC vote share exploded because he immediately, in the middle of the campaign, flip-flopped on overturning the OIC. Well, why do you need to... Why'd you flip-flop on that? You think you're going to get the left-wingers who want to have gun control? You're not. And you're going to betray your base. You lose your authenticity. People don't trust you anymore. Trust has always been very important in society. But in the age of the internet, where it's the margin, the cost and the effort it takes to lie to someone is so low. I could spin up this channel for almost $0, and I could publish propaganda maps all the time. This whole thing could be bullshit. And can you guys check that? Not really. You can verify after an election comes about, especially if I don't really have a good reason why I made a mistake, or at least a reason you don't think is a good reason. But up until the election, you don't know. So if you're watching my channel and you're trying to figure out if you should accept what I'm saying or even listen to me at all, there's faith there, there's trust involved that I'm not trying to be malicious and mislead you. Which is why I often always say, you should cross-reference and look at other models. 338's generally pretty good. I recently found out about Too Close to Call. He seems pretty respectable too. By all means, check their models for any races that I'm covering and they're covering. We have different models, we have slightly different results, but when we're talking about Canada, I think those two guys do a good job. I like to think I do better, but that's depends on the election. And I will admit 338 is better at doing seat projections, though I'm generally better at doing popular vote. So kind of a wash there. But that's the core thing with anything in this day and age. It's trust, it's authenticity. And that's why Poliev is dominating. Either he instinctively knows this, or he cerebrally knows this. Like, either he actively knows this in his brain, or his gut. He just knows this in his gut, that he has to be this way. Either way, he's acting exactly the way he should be acting to succeed in the internet age. If the platform he's giving is the platform he sincerely believes, he's acting appropriately. And that's one of the reasons why he's succeeding very hard. And it's also worth noting, one of the reasons why he's succeeding so hard is he's one of the only politicians who's actually talking on core issues that are causing a lot of the problems that we're seeing in society. So you look at housing or monetary policy as just two. They're very, very closely related. And the economy as a whole, frankly. All three of these are very closely related. Why is the economy been so meh the last decade? Why is housing exploding in prices over the last decade? Well, one of the big reasons is central banking and the failures of people like Tiff Macklem or previous governors of the central bank keeping ZIRP and or zero interest rate policies and quantitative easing going on for as long as they've did over COVID, and even we had zero rate interest policy before COVID. These particular things are complicated. A lot of politicians would shy away from trying to explain it, or another recent one, meters, which is marginal effective tax rate. Something most politicians shy away of trying to explain. Poliev doesn't. He thinks that this is a problem and it's hurting society, so he talks about it. And you know what? He's absolutely correct. Something like meter is hurting people. You might have heard it before of poverty trap. And yes, our welfare system, as currently designed, acts as a gigantic poverty trap. And that's a disgrace. And you would think the liberals would at least be talking about this, but no. In fact, Poliev tried to change in 2018, tried to get a bill passed that would change the rate of clawback on a lot of government programs. This would actually increase net welfare in the short term. In the long term, it would allow people to get off of welfare and land on their feet smoother. The NDP actually supported this, but the Liberals voted it down. So the Liberals are actually opposing smoothing out the tax curve. Because right now the tax curve, and when I say the tax curve, I mean as you gain money, like income, how much tax are you paying? It starts off, you pay very, very few taxes. In fact, you probably pay negative taxes once you count for welfare benefits. But it's really steep until you get over a hump, and I believe the hump ends up working around $80,000, because I don't think you really get any welfare programs after $80,000 in your income. I guess it depends on how many kids you have, but anyways. And then it tapers off, and then eventually it starts going up again as you get closer to $200,000 of your income. But even at $200,000 of your income, your increase for every extra dollar you make is less. You pay less. You pay less net taxes on every dollar increase over 200 than you do under 10, because of how the welfare system is structured. Now we can discuss how generous the welfare should be, or how much the tax rate we should pay, but it's pretty clear that you shouldn't be rapidly having your tax burden shouldn't be uneven. It should be smooth, like it should increase smoothly if it's going to increase. If we're going to have progressive taxes, it should be a smooth progressive tax, not wonky and bumpy. Poliev is one of the only politicians to be talking about this. Again, this is a reason why he's being so successful. Does that mean he's bound to win the general? Hard to say. I'm inclined to think he will. Polling's kind of a bit all over the place, but I wouldn't really put much stock in summer polls right now. And also, I wouldn't really put much stock into polls until he's the official leader of the party. And I also really wouldn't put much stock into polls until you are in an election period, frankly. You can smooth things out, but when you're not in election periods, it's people's vote preferences are kind of wonky. So, it is what it is. I'm inclined to think he will succeed, but again, I can't prove that. So we've established here why Poliev is being so successful in the leadership race. This isn't even a contest, right? You look at donors. He has more donors, individual people donating him money, than everybody else combined. He has more individual donors than the Liberal Party. He raised more money than the Liberal Party raised. On top of all of these other people raising a bunch of money, and the Conservative Party as a whole raising like $5 million in the same quarter. Are Conservatives just astoundingly rich? Well, no, not quite, because you have a cap on how much political donations you can do per year. So it's not that, per se. There's a lot of energy there, and a lot of excitement there, and not on the Liberal side. Either that, or everybody who makes any meaningful amount of income in the country supports Conservatives, which is not true by polling. It's only about, I think, 38% of people make more than 100K support Conservatives. The Liberals are actually pretty neck and neck, typically, in that demographic. So, what is opposition in this race? Well, we're not going to talk Brown, because Brown's out of the race, even though he's on the map. We'll start with Charay. Charay has been billed as his main opponent. Some people even said he's the other frontrunner. How? He's only 3% above Lewis. 3 percentage points. How is he the other frontrunner? At no point has he been anywhere close to being something I would call a frontrunner. But why is Charest so unsuccessful? So Poliev is super successful, for all the reasons I said. Why is Charay unsuccessful? Well, kind of the exact same, the opposite reasons, really. Charay's very unsuccessful because it seems between him and his campaign staff, they don't really understand the internet age. They don't really understand the grassroots of the Conservative Party. So they don't know how to campaign to them. The media and Charest's campaign like to paint Poliev as like a vicious, aggressive, attacking person, and Poliev by no means will shy away from doing an attack, but it's inappropriate to say that he is the one starting a lot of these attacks. Charest's opening campaign thing was saying Poliev should be disqualified from the race for supporting a lawful protest. Like, what? That's insane. Moreover, it's even more insane politically because support of the Freedom Convoy was extremely high among conservatives and even higher among conservative partisans. So, your opening shot in a campaign is to attack the most popular person in the party, most popular politician in the party, for a popular position in the party. That's already dumb. But it's not just particular moments like this. Charest kind of made the mistake. He has a long history in politics, and people in the internet age know this. People can look up clips of what he said or what he's done easily as Quebec Liberal leader or as the leader in the Mulroney administration or cabinet minister in the Mulroney government or whatever. You can easily find this information. You can know what Charay has done. And if you are someone who's spending $15 to be a Conservative Party member to vote in this race, you have a lot of incentive to look into this. And when you do look into this, Charay has a pretty dicey record for a Conservative. He supported gun control measures. He wanted to have a provincial long gun registry, which is ridiculous for many reasons, but the exact opposite of what the base wants. He's introduced and supported effectively the same, what amounts to a carbon tax in Quebec. It was a cap and trade program, but it's kind of the same idea. It's put a price on carbon. His base really doesn't support that. He didn't make it easy. He didn't help the Harper government get pipelines built through Quebec, and in fact, he allowed opposition to stop or slow down or quagmire the process. Well, that's also things regular Conservatives don't like. He cracked down on a lawful protest when students were complaining about tuition raises. Now, you can argue whether you think the protest was legitimate or not, but it was definitely lawful. Cracked down heavy on that, which is one of the reasons why he lost the election in 2012. And these are just a couple of particular examples of things he did in power. Now, there's been some quibbling about whether he raised taxes or not. I don't think that really matters. At best, you can say that's kind of a wash because he's raised some taxes and I guess cut some other taxes, but it's kind of a wash there because you can't really explain to people. He hasn't been able to explain to people why these two things are consistent. Because he did raise some taxes, and he did cut some other taxes. But why? Why'd you do this? Why cut these ones and raise these ones? He couldn't explain that to people. So that doesn't actually help him. And the other big thing that really hurts Charay in this race is he claims that he's been a strong Conservative fighting for the Conservative movement for his entire life. But where was he in the 2010s, 2019, 2021? He wasn't campaigning. He wasn't helping anybody. He wasn't saying good words publicly. You could argue premiers don't typically do that, or ex-premiers don't typically do that. I guess, but so there's no rule against it. So it's not really a good argument in my book, unless you can point to me a very specific reason why it wouldn't be good for premiers or ex-premiers to talk about which federal party they like. I'm not very convinced. Because you also do have premiers do this. Jason Kenney campaigned in 2019 for Scheer. Scott Moe did. All sorts of provincial premiers or ex-premiers have endorsed leadership candidates and have endorsed federal parties. So it's not like it doesn't happen. So why didn't you do it? You have all, and that, these are specific things, but the general thing that undermines all of these examples is Charay is saying one thing, that he's a genuine conservative who wants to do conservative things, and at the other end, his record is spotty on it, and he has no good explanation for why. There could be a good reason why he governed the way he governed in Quebec. But he's not saying why that was, other than to fight separatism. And that's not a very compelling argument to people because maybe in the 90s, separatism was a big deal. But these days, people more take it as a joke. In fact, in my circle of friends, we often joke, some of my friends often joke that they would vote Bloc because they want Quebec to leave too. It's a joke, of course, but that's the kind of thing where separatism is. It's a joke. maybe some Quebec... I do know some Quebecers who sincerely want to leave. But it's such a weak force provincially now. It's only 30% of Quebecers want to leave. And maybe you could say Legault, if he's very successful and he manages to get Quebec off equalization, maybe in the future that won't be the case. Maybe they will want to leave. But I can kind of deal with that later. But the point here, right, is if people don't think it's very serious, it might be serious in the future, might have been serious in the past, you have to have a very good reason why you didn't actually try to govern more conservatively when you were the government of Quebec. Are you telling me there's no conservatives at all in Quebec? Press X to doubt. I mean, right now, Quebec has a vaguely centrist, center-ish right government under Legault. And one of the second-place party is a right-wing party, so I don't think it's a very persuasive argument. And then a lot of Charest's campaign has been attacking Poliev and not really articulating his own positions. He often says, I have a whole website of platform positions. Who cares? I don't want to read your website. How many random people are going to proactively go to your website and read it? Some. But that's not a lot. If you really want to campaign in 2022, you should, by all means, have a website with platform positions on it. Sure. But you gotta have a social media presence, and your social media presence has to articulate your campaign positions and sell them to people. If you're not doing that, well, who cares? What does it matter? So, Charay has basically made a prime example of how you don't run a campaign in 2022, in the age of the internet. He hasn't addressed his history. He hasn't really given people any reason to trust him. He's completely failed at convincing conservatives that he is sincere, that he believes what he believes, and that you should have faith that he will represent you genuinely and accurately nationally. And that's why he's failing, and that's why he was always going to fail. And that's kind of why this whole race was always kind of a joke in the first place. Poilievre's main opposition really was Lewis and Baber. And you might be like, what? Baber's in fourth or fifth, depending on if you want to count Brown, place, and Lewis is doing way worse than she did in 2019, or 2021, sorry, or 2020, sorry. Wow, failed right there. The reason why those two were Poilievre's main opposition is because the reddish Tories, the very, very red Tories that are voting Charay, and lesser extent Brown, and the more purple Tories who are voting Aitchison, they weren't likely going to vote with Poliev. They were always likely going to be going to a reddish Tory or a purplish Tory candidate. They weren't going to go to the true blue, unless there wasn't a candidate who is purplish or red Tory. Lewis and Baber, however, Baber himself was directly contesting the true blue, and Lewis is contesting the socially conservative side. And Poliev does get a lot of the socially conservative side because he's not saying social conservative, pushing a lot of the main social conservative points, but a lot of things he is pushing, if successful and implemented, will help the social conservative movement going forward. So they're backing it, like freedom of speech, stopping universities from cracking down on things, like speech and stuff. That kind of stuff will help the social conservative movement going forward. So they're perfectly happy they're content with supporting him. As just one particular example. In a lot of ways, I think Baber is actually Poilievre's most main opposition, though. Because again, Lewis is more of a social conservative and likely was going to monopolize most of the social conservative hardcore votes anyways. And I think she will likely outperform this. Just as a tangent here. So these are what the model's suggesting, but not everyone's voting. I think only like 450,000 ballots have been returned. So I really expect Lewis is going to wildly outperform this number. And I can't really fix that. She wildly outperformed in 2020, and I suspect she will again. But because of the nature of leadership races, it's very hard to kind of correct for that kind of thing. It's possible, but I couldn't come up with a good way for this. Maybe after seeing this race, and if I am correct, I might the next big leadership race I'm covering, I'll look into that. But I think Lewis is going to wildly outperform, and possibly the detrimental Poliev, he might get less than 73. But if he does underperform 73, it's because Lewis is wildly outperforming. I don't think Charay plus Brown plus Aitchison numbers are really going to get above, what is it, like 17? So, just put that there. But the reason why I see Baber as his main opposition is because Baber was actually campaigning for the exact same lane. He was campaigning for the true blue, more or less. Baber is more the libertarian side of the true blue, but he's still in the true blue lane nonetheless. And yes, Baber in this campaign is getting skunked by Poliev, but that's not anything to do with Baber himself, I suspect. I think that is just the unfortunate reality that Baber is running against Poliev, and Poliev has more experience than Baber in how to do campaigning like this. He's looked into this for a lot longer than Baber has. I suspect he was going to run in 2020, but decided against it for his stated reason why he just recently had a child, which is legitimately true, but I don't really think that was why he waited. I don't know why he waited, but he did. And again, Poliev is much higher name recognition among conservatives. It's very hard to find a conservative or a conservative-leaning Canadian who wasn't aware of Poliev. Some exist, sure, but he's by far the most notable politician in the Conservative Party. And from personal anecdotes, he was more notable than Aaron O'Toole was while Aaron O'Toole was the party leader. Probably why those two didn't get along very well. So Baber had a lot of trouble there. But Baber has done a fantastic campaign considering he was a first-term provincial MP who was kicked out of his own party, has very little caucus support. He's done a fantastic job. And I would actually be so bold to say if he redid this race and everything is the same but Poilievre's not in it, I think Baber narrowly wins fourth ballot. Assuming he doesn't get dropped off before then, I suppose. But I suspect most of Poilievre's voters have Baber above Aitchison, Charay, and possibly even Lewis on their vote cards. And in fact, I think a lot of Poliev supporters probably don't even have Charay ranked at all. So my suspicion is if Poliev wasn't in this race, Baber would be by far the front runner, and then people would be like, oh my god, just some random MP is doing good. And this is not to denigrate Baber or Poliev at all. Part of the reason that either of these politicians, I think, would have won this race, Poliev is almost certainly going to win. If he doesn't win first ballot on the 10th, I will be stupefied. But one of the reasons why this is the case is this is a fundamental flaw with ranked choice voting. In this particular case, it doesn't really matter because Poliev was going to win a majority either way, in first ballot likely. But ranked choice voting wildly favors the most established, most centrist candidate. And keep in mind, centrism is not an ideology. It is just a reflection of the political scale. So when you're talking about right-wingers, which is the Conservative Party, the centrist candidate of the right-wingers is the true blue. This is why Scheer won, and this is why O'Toole won. Bernier was a populist conservative, doesn't really fit in the standard dichotomy. And McKay was a red Tory. Scheer was the blue Tory, O'Toole was the blue Tory, and lo and behold, the blue Tories won both races. One could even argue Harper himself was the blue Tory, though his nomination race was kind of not really much of a race. And this is what ranked choice voting, or in this case single transferable vote, does. It means the centrist person wins, typically. You may or may not agree with that, but it does have a deep flaw, which means you don't get dynamic representation. You get the exact same representation. You get the exact same governing philosophy every single election. In the case of the Conservative Party of Canada, it's basically just a question of which person can actually sell this government philosophy to the average voter. And Poliev might succeed on that, but if Poliev ends up losing to Trudeau, unless it's a very, very narrow loss, I think the Conservative Party really needs to go look and change how they do their nomination races. Because if Poliev loses and they do another leadership race and it's still ranked choice voting, what's going to happen, mark my words, is you're going to get someone else. They're going to be saying almost the exact same things Poliev's saying, and I doubt they're going to be as good a communicator as Poliev. Again, maybe someone like Baber could succeed, and I have no problems with Baber. I think he is a perfectly adequate person. I think he has good takes, and I think he's done good work. However, I'm not sure if Baber has the... What's the right word for this? Is able to compete necessarily communication skill-wise. Maybe he can. It's always a possibility. But I'm not certain. I would say this is one of the other reasons why Poliev is beating Baber particularly, is I think Poliev is just very good at communicating. This is the deep flaw of ranked choice voting. We're going to see the same politician get spit out every single time until the Conservative coalition changes. There's no options here. Red Tories, you might think this system benefits you. No, this system means you can never win. Social Conservatives, this system means you also can never win. Populist Conservatives, this system means you probably can't win unless you are a populist blue Tory, and some argue Poliev is kind of a quasi-populist blue Tory, but hard to say. But this system also means that's really unlikely you would win either, unless, again, you were the populist blue Tory. The blue Tory is going to win, because that's the median, that's the center of the Conservative Party. It'll be really interesting to see, actually, when the next Liberal leadership race happens, once Trudeau is no longer the leader of the party. Eventually. One day it will happen. Because then we'll actually understand what the Liberal voters' thoughts are. If a Trudeau-esque-like person is elected, that really tells you a lot. The fact that the Conservative Party is for the fourth time in a row, going to elect a conservative of the same legislative philosophy as Harper, I guess third time in a row, fourth if you count Harper himself, kind of shows that the system picks people who have the same ideology as Harper. In this particular case, I personally think Poliev is a good candidate. But it is a deeply flawed system because it is going to keep spitting out the exact same person. With the one exception is if you get one person who's just so overwhelmingly popular, they just smash through what ranked choice voting does. And let this be a lesson why we really, as conservatives, really do not want ranked choice voting nationally, because this will likely mean the conservatives can never win. You might argue, that's less fair. That's not how democracy works. Yeah, shut up. Democracy is not about proportional results. It's about people agree on a voting system, and that voting system gets you a result. And as long as the voting system is executed fairly, as long as the voting algorithm is fair, is fairly executed, it's fine. There's pros and cons of different systems, but ranked choice voting will just mean the same person more or less becomes prime minister every single time. The same person becomes the leader of the party. They have a different face, but they have the same beliefs. And that has really deep flaws, and kind of spits in the face of democracy itself, because is it really democracy if every time you vote you get the same result? Food for thought. But with that, I will wrap up the video here. I will reiterate to everybody that there is going to be a live stream on the 10th, on the Saturday. And this will be covering the leadership race. My understanding at the moment, and I will amend this on Twitter primarily, because YouTube doesn't give me access to community tab yet. Damn it, Susan. Give me community tab. But until I have community tab, this will be on Twitter. This will update this. My understanding is the counting starts at 6 Ontario time. So if that is correct, I am planning on starting slightly before 6 Ontario time. So 6 Eastern time. I will correct this on Twitter, and I do have some videos planned this week, so I will also correct that in those videos if I'm wrong. There may or may not be some technical difficulties with my lovely co-host. She's going to be coming, but it might slow us down when we're going to start. So, we'll see. Otherwise, if you liked the video, smash the like button, share it to all your friends so that everyone can see what I'm saying. It really helps the channel. The more subscribers I get, the better. It's kind of like a self-cycling cycle. If you want more people to see this stuff, gotta make sure you share it, make sure you subscribe, do all those things. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I post things sometimes. I retweet things occasionally. Huzzah. I use the platform. Wow. I'm also on Rumble if you decide YouTube is not for you. And if you are watching this on Rumble, good on you. You're probably the only guy who watched this video. But sometimes 5 of you watch this video on Rumble. Fortunately, Rumble does not take any more effort. If you ever make YouTube videos, by the way, strongly recommend setting up Rumble. It takes 0 effort. There you go. But anyways, I wish you all a good day, and I will see you Tuesday with other stuff. South of the border, America. And with that, I bid you adieu.